Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to 3rd Street Center, Carbondale, Colorado, for a very special presentation that we're hosting tonight. The US of A, bringing the original spiritual activists' vision into reality. Our guest presenters this evening are Connie Baxter-Marlow and Andrew Cameron Bailey, original thinkers, authors, photographers, filmmakers, futurists, and inspirational public speakers. They have been researching and writing about the original vision of the US of A for over 20 years. They bring insights gleaned from their explorations of the influence of indigenous cultures on the founding of this country and the deep commitment to freedom and justice the Mayflower Pilgrims brought with them to America. Welcome, Connie and Andrew. I'm going to start us off with a very special piece from Gary Malkin, who's a very well-known composer and musical artist who's done pieces of transformances. And this is from World Unity Week last year in June. So I'm going to slip behind the podium here and start that off for us.
So this transformance is a meditation. So it's just time to go inside and prepare for the information you're going to be receiving tonight. And so just because this is about accessing our highest selves and applying it to our lives and to the future of humanity as spiritual activists.
As we open this virtual space, let's connect and be present with each other. Let's get to know each other with kindness and gentleness. Let's listen to each other with generosity in our hearts. Let's learn from each other with curiosity and wonder. We are a part of nature. We are a part of Earth. We are a part of life. May we use our time together to add to peace and truth and goodness in the world.
Thank you, Rita.
Connie,
Thank you.
the floor is yours.
Okay.
And Andrew.
Thank you.
Well, what I'd like to do is open this with a prayer from our book, The Trust Frequency, 10 Assumptions for a New Paradigm, that is really where we're going with this conversation ultimately, is into trust. And we would like to open this now with this prayer. Grandfather, creator of all that exists, with this sacred pipe, hear my prayer. As the new day dawns, let all people begin anew to walk the good red road of life. May we forget our differences. May we remember our likenesses. Let us hear what we have not heard. Let us see what we have not seen. It is the spark of the universe, the oneness of all life. In such a way, may we be blessed, blessed in a sacred manner. And that's by Wayne Eagleboy. And our work has to do with bringing indigenous cosmology and quantum science into our understanding of the nature of the universe and how we live in a sacred manner. So that really speaks of what you're here tonight to learn about, and how the United States of America was founded on those principles that are in that prayer.
And I'd just like to say it's great to be back in Carbondale, Colorado. I love it. I love looking out there. And there is the sacred mountain of the Ute Indians, who were here long before us white folks. Mount Sopris. Rita, thank you so much for hosting us once again. And this is just Carbondale. When I first heard the name, I went, it's an odd name. And yet we're in this carbon-challenged world, and it seems more and more relevant for some reason. So it's a very special place to me.
Carbon is all that we are,
We
right?
are carbon-based beings, that's
beings.
true. Okay.
And that's where we're going, into that universal understanding. And I just wanted to say that I'm Connie Baxter Marlowe, and I come from a long line of people who lived according to a higher principle. And in this great state of Maine, where they were governors and mayors and great philanthropists that championed the earth, the animals, the children, and the water, and women. So my heritage has driven me to this place to share with you an understanding of a larger reality. And Andrew was raised in South Africa. Do you want to say a little bit about your foundational piece?
Certainly. So my name is Andrew Cameron Bailey. We both have these three-year-old names to distinguish us from others with similar names, I suppose. And yeah, I was born in England back in 1943, which was the middle of a conflict that we now call World War II. And I came in odd choice to make, seeing I was in the spirit world, and I had a big choice, and I said, I'm going there. Looks like it's on fire. They need help. Maybe. At the age of 3, my family moved. When I was 3, my family moved to South Africa, which was a wonderful subtropical environment with monkeys and Zulus and bananas. You just had to reach out and you could grab a papaya from the tree right there. It was just, as a kid, what a blessing that was to be in that extraordinary country. And then growing up during the apartheid era, as you know, you're 12 and 13 and 14 and 15 years old, and you're sort of coming to get a little bit of a political inkling. We were a very liberal family. We were very anti-apartheid, which in that country in those days meant you were a communist. Oh, and in high school and college, I started losing friends because if you opened your mouth, you said too much, you disappeared. Just like in Nazi Germany and just like in Argentina and on and on. So an interesting, challenging, beautiful, and not always pleasant place to grow up. Left there in '69, went sailing, heard about, she swears it's about that Beach Boys song, California Girls, and she's probably right. But there was also something coming out of Canada, and I believe Rita came out of Canada. And out of Canada came this term, cosmic consciousness. And I just, whatever that was, I wanted it. And it was probably in a Life magazine or a Time magazine, something, and I said, whatever that is, I'm going there. And my girlfriend at the time said, if you want that, you have to go to India, to an ashram. And I said, I knew what an ashram was, and we had lots of Indians right there in Durban, South Africa, 500,000 Indians. So I said, no, Northern California. She said India. Long story short, she went to India. I went to Northern California, and here I am, and I've never seen that beautiful girl since. So that's my story.
Yeah, that's a great story. So we come from different perspectives. He came from inside of a war and inside of apartheid. I was born after the war, 1946, in New England after the war. I am a Mayflower descendant, so I come from an ancestry that were these spiritual activists, and these specific spiritual activists we're going to be talking about, and who saw a big picture and lived their lives from that place. And so you'll hear a little bit from both perspectives in some way tonight as we share this journey with you. So here it is, the US of A, bringing the original spiritual activists' vision into reality. So it's about the future. We're going to go into the past, but this is about the future, who you and I are going to be in our lives to bring forth the reality we wish to see and we wish to have for our children. So I've called it the pathway to liberty, justice, equality, abundance for all, because that's the promise the United States of America made to the world. People flock to these shores for that, for their families, for their children. And we are a work in progress for humanity. It's not about a nation, it's about humanity. It's about the stepping stones to that place of universal consciousness, of oneness, of knowing the sacredness and oneness of all life. So we're going to take you on quite a journey tonight, and so let's get with it. Let's see here. Okay, so I got this. So, except I hit it twice. So what is spiritual activism? That's what we're going to address at first. What is it, and how do we walk it, ultimately? Who's walked it, and how do we walk it, and how this nation was founded by spiritual activists. It's so important to understand the founding of a nation, the origin story of a nation. And this nation's origin story is shrouded in misconception and misunderstanding and a lack of understanding that it was a spiritually based founding. It was the seeds of what we can be. And we have people in the audience here who have written books on the subject of quantum science and how to walk into quantum reality. And we welcome you, Larry Gottlieb, and your wife, Kay. So we're just so happy you're here amongst the rest of our Carbondale audience. So, so what is spiritual activism? We're going to run through just attributes of spiritual activism so you understand what it is, because it's very different from resistance. It's about moving into transformation and out of resistance, because quantum reality shows us we create what we put our attention on. So we're going to go into that briefly, but it's so important to understand the physics of what creates our reality. So, first thing, understanding higher truths. Spiritual activism aims to achieve lasting resolution through understanding of higher truths and unity, not through legal judgments or partisan legislation. That's a big deal. Right there, that's a leap. Okay? So, Andrew, do you want to, we'll sort of take turns?
Awaken to our own divinity. Spiritual activism is the application of the higher beliefs of love and unity to change political and social systems, to bring peace and harmony to the world, and to awaken others to their own divinity.
So that's a key piece, awakening to our own divinity and acting from that place. That is the founding of this nation. You'll see that the spiritual activists who had that understanding, ultimately, that we have the right to do that and that we should have the freedom to do that. So, here's another principle. Transformation of motivation from anger, fear, despair to compassion, love, and purpose. It's tough to do in these times when we're seeing such atrocious things going on, but it's key to feeding the collective with a high vibration, and we'll go into that
And I say
further.
that's from the Satyana Institute, so we're not making this stuff up.
Yeah.
Connie did a lot of research and found, I mean, even spiritual activism, if you Google that, there's huge amounts of information from Wikipedia and Henry David Thoreau and on and on.
Yes, I first presented these ideas at the Thoreau Society for his 200th anniversary of his birth, the bicentennial. And then we've presented at the Thoreau Society regularly, and Thoreau is a very important thinker, and we'll be bringing him into this conversation. So here we have another one.
Non-attachment to outcome.
Non-attachment to outcome. Big deal, because we don't know what the divine has in store. We just have to feed that level of vibration.
Integrity in means and ends.
So integrity is so key to the whole thing, because it's all energy, it's all vibration, and can't fool the vibration of the universe. So we've got to be in integrity at all times.
Love thy enemy. Don't demonize your adversaries.
So we know of one great spiritual activist who spoke of loving your enemy, and that is key, because you just give them power when you demonize others. Your work is for the world, not for you. So, service work is enlightened self-interest because it cultivates an expanded sense of self that includes all others. And Andrew has a famous saying.
I've been saying that forever, and to discover this from the Satyana Institute, I mean, I thought I made it up, I really did. It was just I realized that the most selfish thing I can do is to serve you, because that's what serves me the most and the best.
Yeah, and my way of saying that is, when we serve ourselves, we serve others. Okay? That's huge. To understand that when the world is in balance, when we serve ourselves, we automatically serve others, because we bring the world into balance. And when we serve others, we serve ourselves, which is Andrew's piece of that puzzle. So, yeah, there's a whole new way of thinking and seeing the world, and that's what we're speaking about tonight. Rely on faith. Let go of having to figure it all out. Faith can be known as trust, and that's where we're going. As you know, we wrote the book, The Trust Frequency. So trust is a key vibratory level. So, Andrew?
What you attend to, you become. You reap what you sow. If you constantly give love, you become love itself.
Yes. Be a perpetual learner. Constantly challenge your own views. So that's being open to others. Don't get trapped by, and this is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr., pessimism concerning human nature that is not balanced by an optimism concerning divine nature, or you will overlook the cure of grace. So that's key piece, because we can just get so enmeshed in the human aspect of things that we forget the divinity in all of us and all of creation, and the work of the divine in this process. So we have a little video here.
We've got these two words in the title, spiritual activism. What's an activist? How does one become an activist?
For me, an activist is somebody who's active in the world.
Right.
You know, you can either be dead, you can be asleep, or you can get out and engage. And if you're active, that begs the question, where are you coming from?
Yeah.
All the conventional ways of doing your politics, you know, the economic arguments, the social arguments, the cultural arguments, the ecological arguments, none of them were reaching quite deep enough.
The universe is not just a machine, it's not just a storehouse
There you go.
of resources. It's the hubris that goes with the materialist mindset. The idea that we are in charge, the idea that Western civilization with its scientific learning is superior to every other kind of civilization or culture. That is at the heart of the problem.
The central question of spirituality is, does something give life? That spirituality is the interiority. It is the metaphysical, what is behind the physical reality. Some people would say that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Well, may they have very boring lives. Because it's exciting
Yes.
when you start getting off on this trip
Yeah.
and you realise that there is meaning
Yeah.
that gives meaning to the meaning of meaning.
Yes.
The process of being a spiritual activist is one of continuous refinement of self
Yeah.
in community with others. We become each other's teachers. It's about the quickening. It's about that speeding up of sensitivity and awareness within ourselves that shifts us into a progressively more and more ecstatic relationship with reality, where we can find deep joy
Yeah.
even in the midst of suffering. Spiritual activism is about the deep healing work of our time. There might be a deeper reason than you're aware of for why it is that you have come down as this particular person on this particular patch of ground
Yeah.
with your particular skills and so on in this time.
So, yeah, the ecstasy of where we get to when we go into the metaphysical and into our inner being. So, we're going
And I just love hearing the Scots voices. My father was Scottish and I grew up with that, so it's a whole other way of speaking the English language. And you wait till you hear is it the next one?
yeah,
Truly wild.
truly. So, we're taking this from the BHAGAVAD-GITA, which was a treatise that was written way back in the 5th and 6th
2,500 years ago.
2,500 years ago, the 5th and 6th century BCE.
Yeah.
And so this has inspired, the BHAGAVAD-GITA inspires people today in the political realms, and it inspired Henry David Thoreau and Gandhi and Martin Luther King, all those folks. So this is a key thing to understand, and ultimately it's the question that we are grappling with today, to fight or not to fight. You know, what is our Dharma? What are we here for? What are we on the planet for? Which Mr. McAllister spoke about. You know, why are we on this piece of ground right here, right now? So we'll listen to this.
So what is the Bhagavad-Gita? The Bhagavad-Gita can be seen as both a historical book and a trans-historical book. Historically, the Bhagavad-Gita appears as a conversation between two heroes, Krishna and Arjuna. Krishna is understood in the tradition to be God incarnated into this world, and Arjuna is the foremost archer of his times. And their conversation, which runs over 700 Sanskrit verses and 18 chapters in the longest epic in the world, the Mahabharata, is about what is the nature of one's duty. At the moment when a climactic war is about to start, Arjuna becomes confused. Should I fight or should I not fight? And at that time he turns to Krishna for guidance, and Krishna in a response doesn't just tell him what he should do. In fact, Arjuna's question itself is not just whether I should fight or not fight. His question is, what is dharma? Pruchhami tvam dharma sammudha chetaha. In 2.7 in the Gita he asks, Krishna, I want to know what is dharma. The word dharma is often equated with religion, but its meaning is much deeper. Dharma actually refers to nature, that which makes us who we are, that which is our essential, inalienable, defining characteristic. That is dharma. So, dharma also means duty, dharma also means religion, but it is religion or duty that which enables us to harmonize with our nature. So dharma refers to what we are and what we are meant to do. So Arjuna doesn't ask the question, should I fight? He asks, what is dharma? And Krishna's answer is based on not just telling Arjuna what action he should do, or not just what decision he should make, but the foundation of action and decision, that is the underlying worldview. And that worldview of what life is, what we are meant to do in life, how are we meant to lead our life? This is a question that resonates across history and geography, appealing to people everywhere. And it is because the Gita addresses this universal question that it transcends its historical context. And millions of people for millennia have found wisdom in the Gita because it answers these fundamental questions of life. Who am I? And what am I meant to do in life? What is my identity? And what is my destiny? If you are interested in answers to these questions about identity and destiny, then the Bhagavad Gita is meant for us. Thank you.
So, harmonizing with our nature and acting from that place is an age-old premise for bringing spirituality onto the planet, living from that place of our higher being. So here we have spiritual activists throughout time. We're going to run to this quickly. Here's a wayshore to embodying higher law. We all recognize this gentleman, I would imagine. We have the Daganawida, the Iroquois great peacemaker, whom we will speak about tonight. We have the separatists, who defied their king, and who are the Mayflower Pilgrims that we'll be speaking about tonight. The founding fathers of the US of A, Thoreau, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., the American Transcendentalists. We've got John Lennon. Through Imagine, Lennon attempted to create social and political awareness and inspire others to take actions in order to create a utopia. Then we have Yoda. And George Lucas was intending to create a monomyth with Yoda that would attract all religions. And in fact, there is a religion now on the Star Wars religion, I believe. Mother Teresa, you want to read that?
Mother Teresa said, "I was once asked why I don't participate in anti-war demonstrations. I said that I will never do that. But as soon as you have a pro-peace rally, I'll be there."
Yeah, so she lived these axioms. And we have Standing Rock, and we have the United States of America, and now we're going into the original spiritual activist vision. And here's the Great Seal. I suggest you look into the Great Seal. You can go to greatseal.com and research what these founding principles were that they put into the Great Seal. But a couple of them are, it's a new era, Enocopitas, and Providence blessed it. No, a Novus Ordo Seclorum is a new era. Providence blesses it as Annuit Copitas, with the eye of the Creator above the pyramid with the glory, and from the many one. So these are key principles that are at the founding of this nation, among other ones. So we have from monarchy to democracy, the innate desire to be free. And it's the evolution of consciousness that we're speaking about.
As manifested in human society, perhaps, is one way of looking at it.
Yeah. So, do you want to talk about these?
So, becoming the original vision, when will we be free, is a question that you are asking, right?
Yeah.
Trust the process. It's a big leap to true freedom. Freedom of conscience. Freedom to act according to our direct connection to our highest selves. Freedom to act according to the dictates of our hearts. freedom to be our unique divine selves beyond social mores, standards, and expectations.
So that's what we're going to, is that this original vision, is that deep freedom that we're in process of becoming. So as things are collapsing now with the systems that we thought were freedom, brought freedom, this current democracy that seems to be in collapse, we are moving into a higher frequency, a higher form of this democracy, in my opinion. So it's scary, but we've got to get to that place where we're actually truly free. And the beginning of this was the Magna Carta in England.
Both Connie, Mayflower, English ancestors, me, Scottish and English ancestors, these are our bloodlines, our genetic history, our ancestors, right? And back in, was it 1215? On June 15th, 1215, in a field at Runnymede, King John affixed his seal to Magna Carta. Confronted, this is interesting, confronted by 40 rebellious barons, he consented to their demands in order to avert civil war. And so this is, it was very restricted. 40 barons rose up, wasn't the mass rising at all, and the king capitulated. However, just 10 weeks later, Pope Innocent III nullified the agreement, and England plunged into internal war. So it was the first glimmer of something that's never been forgotten. It still exists. We still actually have the original document that was signed. It's in England.
And there were lasting tenets from Magna Carta that came into the Constitution, which here they are: no freeman, and Andrew makes the point, free man. Okay, so we're evolving through the millennia, through the decades. No free man shall be taken, imprisoned, dispossessed, outlawed, banished, or in any way destroyed, nor will we proceed against or prosecute him except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. So this is standing up to absolute monarchy. To no one will we sell, to no one will we deny or delay right or justice. So it's important to understand that these principles came out of Europe with the Mayflower Pilgrims, who we will meet shortly. And it also came to this land with the Iroquois Great Law. At approximately the same time, the great peacemaker, the Daganoweda, came to the Iroquois, the warring tribes of the Iroquois, with the great law of peace. So here is the desire to be free and mechanisms to get there.
So here are these ideas, these seeds of freedom emerging in radically, geographically thousands of miles apart, cultures totally disconnected from one another, and yet this urge in our species to become free, not to have some person at the top telling us what to do or what not to do.
So in England, where this country, the seeds of freedom came from England with the Mayflower Pilgrims, there was a split in relationship to the divine in the late 1500s. And so, do you want to go through that?
Sure. So now this is 400 years later, 400 years roughly after Magna Carta, 1215 to 1620 when the Mayflower lands. 400 years, and that's 400 years ago now, so that's 800 years ago. And just very recently we celebrated the 400th anniversary of the first Thanksgiving, the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Mayflower. There was a system in place that everybody back then just assumed God said it should be that way, and it's that way, and it will always be that way. The king is an absolute monarch. You do what he said or off with your head.
That's a poem.
And he was also the head of the Church of England. So it was assumed we would always have a king, and in England the king became the head of the church. So now you had to go to church, or it was treasonous not to attend, literally treasonous, because he was an absolute monarch. So church attendance was required by law. Then something wild happened in the late 1500s at Cambridge University. The Bible was translated into English and printed, and the printing press and the Gutenberg press. And all of a sudden, everybody had access to this information that used to be hidden behind Greek and Latin and priests and on and on. Now they could read it for themselves, and they went, wait a minute, that's not what they used to say. I'm reading this here, and this is the Bible. Oh. So it's literally started so many revolutions. Lutheranism, Calvinism, Protestantism. So the Puritan movement at Cambridge started in the late 1500s. The idea of the Puritans was to purify the church. They didn't want to leave the church. They just said it's completely decadent, it's completely corrupt. You've got all these big fat bishops in their fancy raiments, and it's ridiculous. And there's nothing about that in the Bible, so let's purify the church. Good luck. So there were those who realized that that was a tall order and probably wasn't going to happen in a hurry. And so they chose to separate from the church. We're going to take the Bible and we're going to go back to the early fathers of Christianity and do the best we can to figure out a church of our own and not have the king, the pope, any of these previous authorities tell us what to do. And they became known as the Separatists, and the most famous group of Separatists became known as the Mayflower Pilgrims, ones who actually left the church. Now, you couldn't leave the church. You couldn't come over to my house and have a service. That was treason. You had to go to the king's church. If you didn't, you were in trouble, and they were in big trouble. They were in prison. Some of them lost their lives. All of them lost everything they had. And when the Pilgrims finally came over here, they came over with a very different idea from the previous history of England. So the separatist movement, based on the right, simple, sounds totally no-brainer, right? The right to act according to my conscience. That's all. That's all.
And they saw from reading the Bible that it was what God intended, that we act directly from our connection to the divine. So in my understanding, in my world, that's where we're headed. It's a huge leap, but we're in that process right now of making that leap. And so these guys, these Mayflower Pilgrims, are you hearing it? They were spiritual activists, very active spiritual activists. You do not get to tell me how to worship and what to worship. I'm going to put my life on the line for that. So that was the beginnings of the United States of America, and the spiritual activism started right there in Scrooby, England, in the mid 1500s.
No,
then ultimately late 1500s, early 1600s in Scrooby.
I do know that. Scrooby's this little tiny town in Nottinghamshire. We've been there. It's beautiful. This little old town.
We've tracked this.
There's a manor there, and that manor house still exists, and that's where these illegal meetings were held.
So at the same time, there was a scientific paradigm being promulgated. So do you want to talk about that?
Fascinatingly, not only was this sort of spiritual and political unfoldment, this evolutionary development that has resulted in the world we know today, but at exactly the same time you had Descartes and Newton, and a couple of hundred years later you had whatever his name was. What was his name?
Darwin?
Darwin, that's right. So, but science began to change radically in that very century.
So here we have the dichotomy.
1620s to the 1640s, science and rational reductionist science started coming in, and that triggered this whole split from the church used to tell everybody what to think. And now it's like, wait a minute, they did not get that right.
Yeah, so humanity was separate from nature, from the divine, and from our conscience. So to me, this is root cause for what's going on today, this scientific paradigm that's shifting with unified science and quantum science and others who are bringing insights into the quantum nature of reality. And so there became a split in the human psyche fear and separation and scarcity took the place of trust and unity. But we had to go through this process because the earth was in a lower frequency and we were responding to that energy. And so here it comes. And we had to do this to transmute these energies. We had to walk into it and live it and create these systems that are collapsing now. But we had to do it to transmute it for all of creation, in my opinion. We've had that job to do, and we've done a great job by putting together these capitalistic systems, these systems based on scarcity and hoarding and power and control over others and all that. So, so the individualism in the context of the materialist reductionist paradigm leads to materialism and domination. So that's what we've got. We've got this reality that we all want out of at this point. So these are exciting times. So we move from monarchy to democracy with the Magna Carta, the Iroquois Great Law, the Scrooby Covenant in 1606, the Mayflower Compact in 1620, and the United States Constitution in 1787. So this is the track, and we're going to take you on that track a bit with the Scrooby Covenant, because this was what those separatists formed when they came together in Scrooby in the early 1600s, committing treason to do it. They formed this covenant amongst themselves, which is a precursor to participatory democracy. And yeah, go ahead.
As ye lords, free people, joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in ye fellowship of ye gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known, or to be made known to them according to their best endeavor, whatever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them. That was the agreement. These are the words that have come down. It's an interesting way of putting it, where people are risking their lives, their freedoms, said we're a church estate, but we're not that church.
As the Lord's free people, which is what we are, ultimately. And we have a scholar, friend of ours, who's written a book called The Pilgrims Then and Now, and we interviewed him for our film that we did. And in a minute, I will play you a little video from him about this, about the sacred covenant, the concept of sacred covenant. But meanwhile, King James was an absolute monarch and head of the Church of England, and he said, "I will harry them out of the land."
So this is the king's response. Fortunately, he didn't say round them up and hang them.
But they did go.
He did say, "I will harry them out of the land," and yet it was you could not get a permit to leave the country. It was illegal to leave. It was illegal to stay. What a dilemma.
So we have the Scrooby Covenant in 1606. They escaped from England in 1609 to Leiden, Holland, and they became lecturers at the Leiden University.
Their leaders did, yeah.
Their leaders did, and they due to the guild system, they were kept as tradesmen in Holland. They couldn't rise, and that's one of the reasons that they left, because they had to stay in this lower echelon. And they left Holland for America in 1620 with a vision of a society based on the freedom of conscience. So here we have that seed of the founding of this nation. And then in 1620, they drafted and signed the Mayflower Compact. We'll go into that a bit. And then in 1621, they connected with Massasoit, the Massasoit, who had a creator-based spirituality. These folks had a providence-based, God-based spirituality.
And for those that don't know, those are the Native Americans who the Mayflower Pilgrims met. They were actually they called themselves Pokanoket. And the Massasoit was their leader. He's now just known as Massasoit, but it really wasn't his name. It was a title.
Yeah, so we call this the first great synthesis, because we call it the birth of the American mind. And these are the aspects of it: the signing of the Mayflower Compact, the Pokanoket Treaty, because when they first got together with the Massasoit, the Pokanokets, they formed a treaty that lasted 54 years, which is a very important time of intercultural exchange. And there was the 3-day harvest celebration in the fall of 1621 that we know as the first Thanksgiving. But it was a coming together and a celebration for 3 days together in 1620, in the fall of 1621, which exemplified their relationship for a whole half a century, which we call the first great synthesis. And here we have Gary Marks speaking on the sacred covenant. This is a really important understanding that he has.
The Pilgrims founded their church and their whole existence really on a covenant, which was a biblical idea, but after having rejected all the forms of the Church of England and indeed the state, the covenant was the foundational first principle of their existence together. They drew up the covenant in 1606 in a speck of a place called Scrooby in England, and thereby became separatists. They separated from the Church of England because they were based upon a covenant, which means that each party agrees with the other to operate on certain principles. They created a kind of proto-democracy in that each person who was a member of that covenanted church could have a say in the way they made their decisions. This, for them, was exclusive to their own congregation, but it had a universal tendency that got put into place when they landed in Plymouth. After a long and arduous journey and many frustrations along the way, they finally became a covenanted community, and the idea of the covenant expanded itself into the social order, became the Mayflower Compact, and they extended the covenant notion to everything they did, eventually into civil and judicial affairs. And it was a grand experiment. And while not equivalent to the Constitution, it at least was a seed, a stepping stone, Bradford said, unto more important work yet to be done. The covenant always expressed that God had more to do with them than any one given time. They walked in the ways made known or to be made known to them. And that's an important thing, because there is a kind of evolution in the meaning of democracy. The Pilgrims considered all agreements to be sacred. That was the only sacred thing there was. And that applied whether it was to other Europeans or to Native Americans. It was sacred. The idea of mutual benefit one to the other was universal in its application for them. The Pilgrims at the time would not have thought that they were making a cultural exchange per se. The fact was, though, that they were. They learned certain things from the native peoples and respected that. They also wanted to contribute to the native peoples as well, so that there was a cultural exchange. It's just that the cultures were so vastly different from one another. But they eventually worked things out.
The Pilgrim history is a story which has no end. It will end only if people suffer a failure of nerve in the quest for basic human rights. It can honestly be said that all who cherish freedom are Pilgrim descendants. Gary Marks, Pilgrims Then and Now. And we have copies of it for you to take home if you have more interest in who these people truly were. It's very important
And
to
Gary
recognize
was the
this.
45th, I think it was, minister of the Pilgrim Church in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And he just, as I mentioned, passed away recently.
Yeah, and a good friend.
Lovely man.
And he showed up for us whenever we needed him to show up.
It was a-
So here's the Mayflower Compact, the principles in the Mayflower Compact. You want to read that?
The Mayflower Compact was another agreement that the Mayflower passengers crafted on the boat before they came ashore, because there was a definite tendency among some to mutiny. And they knew that once they landed, they were going to need some rules of engagement. How are we going to govern ourselves? So these are just some segments.
The mutiny had to do with the fact that they didn't land in the Virginia patent where they were headed. They actually came further north and landed in Massachusetts, what we call now Massachusetts, that they didn't have a patent for. And the question is, did they do that intentionally? Because there was already a church in the Virginia
Church
colony.
Was there,
the Church of England was there. So it served them to come and start afresh. So that's the big question. Was that intentional, or did they get blown there because
there was 66 days at sea, and some don't know.
Yeah,
so,
but here we have
in the presence of God and one another, we covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic for our better ordering and preservation, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices from time to time, and shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience.
So right there, you have democracy and serving the common good and equal and just laws and obeying those equal and just laws. Those are big words for man-made law. There's universal law. How do we get man-made law that is just and equal and serving the common good? That's the question at this point in time. We're on the cusp of collapse and creation right now in 2022. So here we have it, and I just think it's so important, this inspiration of the beginning and the higher law that's expressed in these documents and in this vision of what we have yet to become. So don't be discouraged, folks. We're becoming something. It's all good. So it's an evolutionary upward spiral. So they met with the Pokanoket, the Massasoit, in the spring of 1621. They didn't meet any Indians until the spring of 1621. And half the Pilgrims had died during that winter. And so this is, I want to give you an understanding of the spiritual alignment of the Pilgrims and the native people they lived amongst. This is a radical perspective, and this is proof, writings of one of the Pilgrims, Edward Winslow, who was basically the ambassador to the native people, who was in constant relationship with them. So, further observing us to crave a blessing on our meat before we did eat, and after to give thanks for the same, he asked us what was the meaning of that ordinary custom. This was, they had spent the night in the home of one of the leaders of the native people, and one of the leaders who wasn't really totally pro-English. The Massasoit was. They had just gone to actually bring a cure to Massasoit who had been dying, and they had stopped at this fellow's home to spend the night and spend time with him on their journey, because it was 30-40 miles for them to walk from Plymouth to the Massasoit place in New Hope, which is now Rhode Island. So I told them that whatsoever good things we had, we received from God as the author and giver thereof, and therefore craved the blessing upon that which we had and were about to eat, that it might nourish and strengthen our bodies. And having eaten sufficient, being satisfied therewith, we again return thanks to the same our God for that our refreshing, etc. All of this, This, all of them, concluded to be very well, and said they believed almost all the same things, and that same power that we called God, they called Khitan. So you can access this in Good News from New England. It's a little booklet that was printed in England in 1624, the journal of the first year with the native people, their first year, the Pilgrims' first year. So please go to that original source material. It's very interesting reading, and it's a little teeny book that was actually published at the time. So this isn't history being written by the victors. This is people on the ground experiencing life and reporting it. So it's very exciting to have this understanding, this alignment brought forth in this way, so that we can go forward and know that there was this cultural exchange, this spiritual alignment with the native people that we feel is happening now as things unfold.